Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. I am Rob. I'm going to be moderating tonight's conversation. But we're just going to be waiting a couple of minutes to let people filter in. But tonight's discussion is with the board of SF Parent Coalition, the formally decreasing the distance. So really excited to get to know you guys a little bit better and share the good word about the work that you guys have been doing over the last year and a half. But yeah, we'll go ahead and just let everyone get situated, get comfortable. I know this is dinner time, so hopefully you already ate dinner or just grabbing a snack. But with that in mind, I mean, what's everyone's plans for dinner tonight so far?
I can share because that was very top of mind where I got delivery from a local spot in the Richmond district, Sakasan. So I got some sushi, and for the parents joining, when you have like 5 or 10 minutes to eat real fast before you transition your child, that's what I felt like I was doing just now. So I had probably about 2 sushi rolls of whatever I was eating, but I ate it really fast with some wasabi and some ginger, and so I'm letting it settle right now.
Sake-san is really good. I ordered from there a lot when we couldn't go out to eat. They're really good.
I'll add that I'm still sort of on dinner duty, unfortunately, for my children who eat all hours of all times of the day. So if I do go off camera, just know I'm probably somewhere making a sandwich. But yes, I tried to eat before here. I smothered some pork chops.
I scarfed down an In-N-Out burger in my back to school night Zoom preceding this because I knew there wasn't going to be any time tonight.
That's a solid choice. I haven't had In-N-Out for a long time, but every time someone brings it up, I'm like, yes, that exists. I need to go eat some.
I had leftover macaroni and cheese. It was great. It was delicious. My husband had made it for me. It was great.
I don't think there are words to describe what I made. It was a conglomeration of various leftovers with cheese. Let's put it that way. Better left unsaid.
That's exactly how I described the first time my wife cooked for me when we first started dating. It was just things that she had in her fridge thrown together. And then I said, I'm not eating this for breakfast. Let's go to Devil's Teeth. So then we just went and got like sandwiches from there. And I've been doing the cooking ever since. So, well, I do want, we can go ahead and get started. I want to make sure that tonight's discussion, we don't spend too much time because again, like I said, it's dinner time. But thank you for those of us for those of you who are joining, and especially the board tonight for joining tonight's discussion. And again, congratulations on the relaunch from Decreasing the Distance, the SF Parent Coalition. I know, you guys are still planning to stick around even after you focused on school reopening over the last year, and now that schools are back open, kids are in the classroom. You guys are still going to stick around and continue doing the good work that you guys have been doing, focusing on parent advocacy, making sure that you guys have a voice in how the school district is run, and holding the district accountable, doing the best for students. And I really appreciate you for the work that you're doing. As someone who's like newly married and from here, I'm looking to you guys to really build and pave the way for like a really more equitable and results-driven school district. So when I have kids eventually, that I know that they're going into a district that's doing the best for them. So thank you for that. But with that said, I kind of want to go into, real quick, again, like I completely forgot to introduce myself, but that's it. I'm Rob. I am from Together SF. If you don't know about us, we are a civic engagement nonprofit here in San Francisco, just really helping people get engaged in their communities and connect with others who are interested in working on some of the challenging issues that San Francisco is facing. So I'm really happy again to be here tonight. So thank you guys for having me. But we're not here to talk about me or what Together SF does. We're here to talk about what you guys are doing. So I want to turn it over to the board to introduce yourself, give us your backgrounds, and kind of talk about why this work is important to you. And I think maybe we can go ahead and start with Yvette.
Sure, my name is Yvette. I'm a member of this board. I joined in with this group sometime in, I think, October or November. I have 2 young sons in SFUSD, a 3rd grader and a 5th grader. I think my background is in advocacy. I've been an advocate pretty much almost all my life. And also some e-learning principles, given what I do in my day job. But really just here to sort of uplift voices that aren't usually politically connected and really talking to people about accessibility and making informed decisions based on the information that they're given. So that was sort of my foray into this group.
All right, thank you. Cliff?
Yeah, so Cliff Yee, born and raised here in the Richmond district. Pretty much went to public school here as Argonne, Roosevelt, and Washington. And myself, I am on the PTO at Frank McCoppin Elementary School. So I'm their co-chair there, where my daughter is in the 2nd grade and I have a 3-year-old in preschool. And professionally, I work as a leadership trainer for a local nonprofit called Coro, where I work with high school students all the way up to seniors, just really working about how do we lift up core competencies around self-awareness, communication, collaboration. And I'm really excited to be part of this board. And part of what I feel like I bring to the space is the connections and community that I've been in over the past decades, working in the city, and really trying to think about, leadership and how does that apply in this space that we found ourselves in, which is very, very political, and also trying to really see how we can, build some intentional bridges and continue to lift up parent voice.
Great, thank you. Kit?
Hi everyone, my name is Kit Hodge. I have 2 kids in SFUSD, a 6th grader and a 4th grader. My background is in transportation advocacy, and then I also founded and ran my own company for a while as well, also in the transportation realm. I am here because if any of you have started from the sort of place of being deeply skeptical of the work of this group, I was you maybe about a year ago, and it took going to events like this to understand what was really going on and the people who were really behind it, and seeing how incredibly impressive it was and how well meant and real it is. And so if that's your journey, welcome. I'm glad that you've taken this step to sort of see things for yourself. I eventually got very involved after seeing, a number of kids in my life I care very deeply about suffering very deeply because of prolonged distance learning and hybrid learning. That said, I'm equally excited about our new direction and new goals for the coming years. So I'm looking forward to talking about that as well.
Next we have Seth.
Great. My name is Seth Brenzel. My husband and I live in Bernal Heights. We have a daughter who's in 5th grade, and I got involved partly because I was a PTO leader at the Glen Park Elementary School, and a lot of the things that we used to be able to do as a PTO went away because we had a pandemic, and I wondered if there were other ways to connect with parents about sort of helping our kids through the pandemic while they were sheltering in place and at home. I became more aware of the gaping inequities in terms of what people's experiences were, that sort of adage that we may all be in the same storm, but we certainly weren't all in the same boat. And that became a kind of a resonant phrase for me throughout. I got scooped up in a Facebook message from Meredith Dodson last August, I think, late August. Hey, you might, I'm talking to people, you want to talk about this? And then the journey just kept going, and I found myself more and more activated. My background is as an educator. I'm kind of a governance nerd. I'm really interested in how things are led and organized, and the school district kind of started glaring at me as a thing that actually has some serious shortcomings, and I think we all saw that. So I'm excited about helping to forward our group's mission, particularly around accountability for our school district leaders. I think those folks are accountable to all the citizens of San Francisco, and most importantly, to our school children. I'm thrilled that you all decided to spend the next 45 minutes or so with us, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Sin.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thanks to the folks who made it tonight. My name's Sin Wang. I'm also a San Francisco native. I'm the mom to a second grader at Jefferson, and I'm a small business owner. My background is in law and policy. So when this pandemic started and laid bare a real abdication of leadership at the school board, I felt compelled to join and compelled to do something, especially as I saw how it impacted my own daughter and really the learning loss and social emotional impacts across the board on all our youth, especially BIPOC kids. So I've just been progressively getting more and more involved and inspired by this group, particularly folks on this board and our communities on Facebook and the mailing list. It's just a group of really authentic, passionate people who want to be here to lift up parent voices and do right by our kids.
Thank you. And finally, last but not least, we have Meredith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Meredith Dodson. I'm a kindergartner in the district, not a San Francisco native, but my husband is. Went through the district start to finish. And I've been involved with this group since before it was SF Parents, before it was Decreasing the Distance, when it was just an idea last summer of 2020, when schools were closed, and the conversation of parents, families in the district, talking about in these Facebook forums and other social media places. We were all just on, online connecting about what was going to happen with the district. Was it going to reopen? Looking at districts around the country who were talking about reopening. And it wasn't even a conversation at our district leadership level from our Board of Education, and families were scrambling to try to figure out what to do about that. And so really where this group started was focused on, myself, and then connecting with, how I messaged Seth Brenzel and found Yvette Edwards by finding her on a board meeting and stalked her and found her afterwards. And same with Cliff. We just were parents that found each other during a really hard time and connected, and then found more parents like us. And we were really initially, we were just focused on creative solutions to help each other get through a difficult time. A lot of families were forming learning pods to, small groups of kids with babysitters or teachers or tutors, so that families could work. But of course, that's expensive, and that's a private paying option. And most families in our district did not have that option available. And some families were on the other end of the spectrum, were able to qualify for our city's learning hubs. But there were so many families in between that didn't have either of those options available to them. And that's really what the heart and soul of this group was when we formed, and we started to connect and think about what can we do. And so, my conversations with Seth Brenzel were around, well, what is Glen Park Elementary doing? And we were learning from him, and he was sharing with others in the group about how the PTO was using some of their funds to help the families who had just needs for, basic needs that weren't being met. And so it grew from there. We started shifting to a reopening focus when we were hearing more and more from families across the whole district. As we were hearing from more families, and we were hearing, well, I really do want my kid back in school. I'm seeing that these districts are able to figure it out safely around the country and get their kids back and get our educators back safely. And we were hearing that, across the board from families all across the city from diverse backgrounds. And that's when we started to shift to this reopening prioritization. And that just became our focus, this whole past year. But schools reopened. And so we've decided to stick around because we have formed this amazing group of parents and caregivers and educators in our group, and just a really phenomenal community working together to hold our district accountable to being the best it can be for our public school students. So thank you for joining us tonight. We're happy to have you here learning about our work and how you can get involved in the San Francisco Parent Coalition.
All right, well, thank you all for your introductions and keeping them brief. But so I have a couple of questions that I just kind of wanted to get through here to make sure people get a better understanding of your organization and kind of where you guys are headed. And the first one being, you know, we talked a lot about school reopening. That's been mentioned a lot in the news over the last year, nationally, especially locally here. But I wanted to ask, you know, you mentioned you shifted your priorities to reopening. Why did you guys choose to fight so hard for school reopening? And I kind of want to turn this over to you, Yvette. Maybe you want to take a stab at this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you noted, there were definitely a lot of issues last year, and we did talk about a lot of those issues. I think that over time there were a lot of different directions that were exposed for a lot of people for the first time. I myself was not surprised. I've known that for years, and I've been working at my own site to sort of address some of those issues. I think that for me, this particular issue was the one that I was hearing from my community as being the one that needed to be the focus at the time. And so, not to say that there weren't other things that we didn't advocate for, because we did, you know, whether it was ventilation, whether it was OST time, after school time, to figure out if we can get more children back into some sort of environment where they were able to study while they were online with a group of families. But safe reopening for me was very personal. Education for me, I guess, is a very, very personal thing. Last year, in-person education, but really, to be honest with you, education in general, always, because for me and my family, it's why I'm here. And I know firsthand what it can do for a child. I was particularly watching my children struggling next to me, and their teachers were fantastic. There was no doubt about that. We were very blessed in that sense. But safe reopening and talking about some options when they did actually seem as if they were real options, it just wasn't really being discussed in a way that I felt demonstrated a broad range of views, just based on conversations I was hearing, or the families in my community that I knew personally or broadly. So not even just from a Facebook group, just really personal for me in a lot of ways. And that included families with IEPs. There were single parent families having job, food, and security concerns who were reaching out to me from my own site. Also, I like a lot of research. My dad will tell you I was a natural Nancy Drew. It is how I somehow ended up in law school, but never really practiced after that whole experience, but sort of went into education myself and in helping law students in their legal education and beyond. But I think I just really thought the research and some of the information could be shared more broadly with people who didn't necessarily have access to it as quickly, so they could make an informed decision for themselves. And so also they could then understand and figure out for their families what was best. But all that being said, you know, I have a lot of friends who are educators and have children throughout the country, and they had all gone back. So I started there. I started that research, and they gave me a lot of guidance. I have educators here who were giving me guidance about their experiences. But at the end of the day, it just felt like there wasn't a lot of transparency back then. There weren't a lot of other new voices at the time in the city having those conversations about safe reopening, that it was even possible. So I fought hard because it was time, in my opinion, for a lot more families to be able to figure out a way to elevate their voices, talking about updating information from public health professionals, and really just saying, hey, can we just have some options for the families that need them? It wasn't even ever really for me about having to go back necessarily if you weren't prepared. It was about saying, can we make some options available when we're being told it is safe to do so? And I believe that remains true today for me. I think one of the first things that I did that sort of brought my sort of experience and expertise to this group was organize a town hall, right? There hadn't been a lot of town halls back then. There's been a lot since then, but back then there hadn't been a lot of town halls that just got the community together. We had about 500 educators and families and community members, and people just showed up to listen to UCSF doctors sort of explain what was happening, talk about COVID-19, talk about the safety. And a part of that for me was because I felt like for a lot of people, and myself included up until a certain point, we were living like it was March 2020, And we had to start thinking about the fact that it was November 2020. And if this was possible for the families that needed it, we definitely need to consider that. And then I guess finally, to be honest with you, at the end of the day, it really came down for me as a Black woman and as a Black mother. I knew many Black families and many families of color who were struggling in many different ways. One of the other things we organized very early on was bringing a lot of mothers, Black mothers like myself, in front of Board of Education members. This was probably back in November, to sort of share their stories from all over the city and advocate for themselves. It wasn't something I was trying to do for myself, but really just making those connections so that they could hear from broader members who maybe necessarily didn't have the time or understood how to call into board meetings. You know, they're doing other things, they're getting food on the table, they have jobs. And so that for me was really important, you know, getting that information to them, making it accessible for them so they could tell their own stories seemed really important. You know, Black and brown families were not a monolith. I don't speak for everyone, and I've never pretended to. And that just wasn't what I was hearing from many families in my community. I think that it was important when I heard a message that the Board of Education wasn't hearing from our families. It made me a little bit sad, because I knew that wasn't necessarily everyone's truth, not being a monolith. And I mean, that was really it. I just thought there should be options for families, and all voices should matter in a lot of ways, even if they didn't know necessarily how to make that feeling or that energy known. I think that's why this particular conversation started and why it was so important for me to fight.
Yeah, and I think San Francisco was like the last, or one of the last like major school districts in California, I think, to like you know, safely reopen, which I think is just crazy to me. You know, considering the science and everything that had been going on. But so you kind of mentioned a little bit, and this had come up in other people's introductions too, about the school board and kind of the work that you guys have been doing with them. The school board, Board of Education, those are kind of used interchangeably. But for those of us who don't necessarily who haven't been tuning into those meetings, or don't have the time to tune into those meetings, or don't really know much about them, I will say, like, up until recently, I did not really pay much attention to the school board race. So I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about what the school board is, what they're, you know, and why people should care about the, you know, the people that are elected to these positions. And I don't know, you know, Sin or Cliff, maybe if either of you two, as, you know, as both natives, you know, want to take a stab at this.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Sin, you know, my awareness of you unmuting yourself, you know, feel free to chime in first, and then we can fill in the gaps. But I think what I might start with, and maybe Sin and I just end up tag teaming this, but it's like, I think similar to you, Rob, is before I was a parent, I probably didn't pay too much attention to the school board race. I definitely knew folks who were on the board before, but maybe not until it was 7 years ago, because my daughter is 7, is I think when I really started to pay a little bit more attention to the race. And I think that one of the things that also led me to get involved with my various hats at McCoppin was, you know, feeling that I need to be responsible to my school community. I really didn't hear any information in 2020 around what was happening with the schools. And so I didn't hear it at the school site council level, at the parent teacher organization level. And with my various hats, I felt like I would have heard something, you know. And so that was definitely a call for action to, like, how do we hold the district accountable to sharing effective communications and being transparent around plans that parents can react to, even if they're, you know, in ideation mode. And so I think some of the uncovering that I start to do, and some of the learning that I did, was understanding the different layers around what is the school board responsible for and what is it not responsible for. And in San Francisco, you know, the school board, and I believe one of their primary responsibilities is to sort of guide and direct the superintendent, right, and the staff there, and that in San Francisco, the school board is elected into office by the voters, and what we've seen play out over the past year and a half or so is that the mayor of the city has no jurisdiction right over the school district, and that is very much the leadership of the school board that oversees that. I'll take a little pause here and then pass it to Sin.
Yeah, I think many of us saw from the census that San Francisco is the most childless major city in the United States. That to me is a real symptom of the crisis that we're in our public school system, that families don't feel welcome anymore here. They don't feel their children are thriving in our public school system, and great cities need great public school systems. And when we look at the school board, they're the decision makers, they're the governance here. And so part of why I wanted to be so involved in this group is to make sure that we hold them accountable and that they're doing their jobs. When the San Francisco Department of Public Health and the California Department of Public Health decided it was safe for kids to be back in school, and our kids waited 100 more days to do that, and many waited then the whole summer and the fall, middle and high school students to get back, it was not acceptable. And it's the school board that's the entity that's responsible here. So I think it was a real wake-up call for a lot of parents.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I'll add from sort of this leadership perspective is that I think one of the challenging things with a board, particularly like with this board, is when you have this transition and you have some returning and some new school board members, and they're 7 elected officials, and they're bringing with them their own individual lived experiences, their own communities that they represent, their own idea around maybe what leadership means, around decision making, and we're seeing that sort of play out in front of us, and I think that has caused a lot of friction, and we're still seeing some of that friction continue to play out with some of the tense relationships that you see on and off video camera sometimes, and I think that's really difficult for parents to see, because these are the decision makers for our children, right, our students, and so I think one of the hopes that we have as the San Francisco Parent Coalition is, how can we more intentionally build these to have open channels of communication as we continue to lift up concerns of the parents that, when we're hearing these concerns, how do we surface them in a way? And then, how can we agree to disagree? But ultimately, what are ways that we can work collaboratively in service of our students, so as Sin said, that they can thrive in this school district?
Thank you. And then the school board, do they have regular meetings? I know the Board of Supervisors meets on Tuesdays. So when does the school board have regular meetings as well that people can attend?
Yes, they also meet on Tuesdays, but there's, I don't know if anyone knows how many number of committees that they have, because they have the committees that meet, and then they have special meetings that they can also call. And so one of the just to name it, one of the frustrations as we figured out this meeting cadence of the school board was when we were, asking to prioritize school reopening plans on the agenda. Sometimes that didn't occur until 10, 11 o'clock at night, which is 5-6 hours into the meeting, and it was really that's just hard for parents to sit and listen, to try to comment on that time, to hear a plan, and so I don't know if anyone has a better answer to the cadence of the meetings.
No, I think you covered it. I think the reason why people got so frustrated last year was just because of that. I don't think that any one issue was more important than the other. I think that there was just a lot of interest in, okay, can we talk about this a little bit earlier? Can we make sure it's accessible for the families that can't stay on this long, who have to get back up in the morning and go to work, or who don't even know it's happening? And even the special meetings. I mean, one thing that happened here, and I know that it seems frustrating for a lot of people who've been doing this work for so long, but Zoom made it possible for people to be able to attend meetings at different times of the day. And we should want that. We should want as many voices in the room speaking for themselves as we can. So yes, new voices showed up and they were able to do it. But also, yeah, I didn't know about any special meetings. I've been an active member in my community at my own school, and diversity inclusion chair, co-founded our APAG. And it was definitely, I think, that frustration that probably led to it more so than anything, because there were so many families who were just waiting and thinking, okay, when are we going to talk about what's happening, with us? And that was everywhere throughout the city. No matter who you were, there were a lot of people who didn't understand sort of the agenda. To be honest, that was me.
Yeah, I do recall definitely hearing about the reopening being pushed back until like 11 o'clock at night. And I don't understand how people would even want to be on a meeting at that time. But kind of shifting back to reopening, because obviously that was a top priority for a lot of parents who were calling in last year. Schools are now reopened. I think schools have been in session for like 2 weeks now. There's like the 16th was the first day, I believe. So with that said, like what finally changed to get schools to reopen, and how are you happy with like how things turned out? And I'll turn it over to you, Seth, and if anyone else wants to chime in too, go ahead, but I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think parents and family members and caregivers awoke to their power in the district in ways that they hadn't really sort of imagined. And I think some of it was frankly just all the observation that was starting to happen with the school district. I think it started somewhat in our group, but I think there were lots of other parents, not even necessarily in the group, who were observing board meetings, watching what was going on, wondering when, waiting for information. I think that sort of awakening to sort of parent advocacy and our ability to ask for more, even if it's not necessarily for a long time it was asking for an agenda item to be first or second or sometime before 11 p.m. About school reopening. And it took a while for the board to actually acknowledge that that was wrong, that they had sort of put other things ahead of that. So that was one really important thing. I think also building community amongst our parents group in at least in our group, but then with amongst all of the other groups that we connected with, people in other settings, parents just frankly coming forward and being advocates for their kids. We had I don't think any of us thought we were going to ever organize a march. I think if you had asked us in August, like, oh yeah, we're going to have a march. No, we were going to have a march, or we're going to do letter writing campaigns on on weekdays to get the board members to realize, like, oh, it's been a year and we still don't have a plan to open. I think there became a sense amongst. I think we used our voices and we kept lifting each other up. Not every one of us has the same sort of ideas about how schools should work, but we all knew that the gaps that were forming around this displaced learning, that somehow school was going to be online for some undetermined indefinite period, was just not acceptable. Even if not everybody could go back, kind of back to Yvette's point earlier, I really like that. It's like for some folks that wasn't there, they weren't ready, but for others they were, and there was no option for that, and that seemed wrong for our kids. I think the other thing I'll just say is the continued focus on the kids. Here we all are adults on this Zoom, and it's really great that we all have this time and we just had dinner and maybe whatever, but our kids are in the schools and they can't advocate for themselves. They are not able to do that. They can't go to Zoom meetings, they can't go to board meetings, they don't even know necessarily how a board meeting works, and we have to kind of lift their voices up through our work. So I think all that happened. I will also say schools reopened because it was safe to do so. And our Department of Public Health did an amazing job helping San Francisco figure out how to do that for the last 18 months. And I keep thinking about how we just need to continue following their lead. And, I run an educational program, just as an aside, and you can feel safe and you can be safe. And the health officials have kind of guidelines about how to be safe, but there's also a feeling of safe. And I think the other piece is that leadership, particularly educational leaders, need to figure out how to also lift up the feeling of safe too, and make it so that that's what they're also advocating for. Not to overlay or kind of get rid of sort of concerns. I think those should be lifted up and be transparent. But there's a role for an educational leader to sort of help connect feeling safe and being safe. And I think that's what started happening in our school district. And I'm optimistic that it'll keep going.
Great. And then now that, schools are reopened, you guys have spent so much time working towards that, and they are, and, here we are, August 2021, kids are back in school. What are your guys' priorities for and focus in like the coming year, aside from, I guess, providing that feeling of safety and just making sure that the gaps in academic achievement are filled, and the district becomes more equitable? I guess how do you guys plan to what are your priorities for the upcoming year? Maybe Kit.
Yeah, so we're really clear that at no point I think anyone on this call was like, well, school and SFUSD was perfect before schools closed. There are no problems, and the only problem that has ever happened is that schools closed, and now that they're reopened, we're good, right? Quite the opposite. Many of us have come from a background of being active at our local school or in some other form or fashion that I'm very much aware of the deep-seated sort of baked-in inequities and other kinds of problems in our school district. That said, we also want to lift up how wonderful public school is, and how vital public school is, as Sin mentioned earlier, to the city, to our children, to our nation, to, you name it. Yay, public school. So I think the role of school closures in that was to help far more parents see those problems up close and personal, because you couldn't not see it. It took a lot of effort not to see those problems when schools were closed. You were sitting next to your child if they're at home, or maybe you were, hearing strange things while they were off at a, learning hub or whatever. And you saw, very close up what was going on, what was not going on. And so I think it also were exposed, if you got active, to what was happening at the Board of Education, what was not happening at the Board of Education. So a lot more parents sort of learned a lot more about the school district for better or for worse over the last 18 months or whatever it's been at this point. So transitioning into the now, we came together and said, well, we have all these parents now who really want to make sure that the root cause of why all this has happened, both the longstanding inequities and the school closures, which to our mind has been the forgetting to focus on the kids, right? It all comes back to that. If you put the kids center, you make good decisions. If you forget to put the kids center, things get screwy. And we have what we have now. So if we can agree on the idea that we should be putting the needs of children central in all decision making in the school district, because schools are for kids, then what does that look like? So we're hoping that folks who agree with that, who really got active in this past year and far before that as well, come along with us into our new journey. In the coming year, we're going to be focusing on 4 issues. The first, no surprise, is indeed fully reopening all schools, including before and after care, which is still an issue, sports, still an issue, clubs, maybe we'll see, and other beloved student activities. These are the things that get kids to be excited about coming to school day in and day out. The second thing is picking up the pieces of all the negative academic, social, and health impacts of those prolonged school closures on children, including the deeper impacts on longstanding inequities in the system. Everything that happened with school closures simply exacerbated all the other underlying problems at SFUSD. The third thing, as other folks have spoken about at length, we really want to hold the district and city accountable to doing everything they can to support the vast and diverse needs of our public school children and families. And there's a lot to do there. And of course, it raises a lot of hackles with people who don't want things to change. And fourth but not least, we want to create a new unifying vision and build support for a path forward to excellent San Francisco public schools for all kids. So, no small thing there, just a little idea. But our end goal here is to have the kind of school system where people say, oh, you live in San Francisco? Oh, you're so lucky. The schools there are wonderful. You are so lucky. I wish I could move there with my kids. We want that for every single child in the system, right? So education is a tough area to step in. And I should say, all of us have been active in lots of ways, but none of us are education policy experts. None of us have been in this space for a long time and, know all the ins and outs and, the secret magic here. We are learning our way just as much as almost everyone else in this, and doing our best as we can. And so what we're seeing is a lot of ideas that have merit perhaps, but perhaps need some more nuance, as well as some tired ideas that are not working. So we're looking at what really will work. What are the actual things that will serve children, every single child in this district, to make their school experience the envy of this country. So we hope you'll join us.
Yeah, and my next question is kind of a follow-up to that one, which is around influencing, SF Parent Coalition's priorities. Like was I think Yvette mentioned before, there were some issues with like other diverse voices being brought up and around school board meetings. So when you talk about building this diverse coalition of parents, making sure that everyone's voice is included, how do you plan to do that? How do you plan to incorporate that? And if I'm like a parent or like an educator and I want to get involved and I want to I see a problem with my child's school, how would they be able to lift up that problem to you guys and make that pop up on your radar and make it a priority for you guys to start advocating for that? Maybe Yvette?
I'm not going to take that entirely. I'm going to pass a little bit of that off, I think, to Meredith, but I do want to say something that's so interesting. Rob, you just mentioned, I think you are newly married. We do have to make space for the fact that if you want to stay here and you want your children to be here, you need to be educated about what you're voting on. We need money for our educators. We need money to make sure that our schools are actually functioning in the way that they should be. We don't go to the ballot box. There's no box before you maybe decide, if you decide to have children, that says, I'm a parent, right? Like, you don't have that information, but you get to vote on what's happening in our public schools. So for me, again, going back to an education lens, as Cliff would say, it really is about educating the community, not only about, what's happening when you are actually in SFUSD, but as someone who maybe later on will end up in SFUSD, about what you should be voting for, because some of those ballot measures can really hurt our public schools, right? So just making sure that that's something that we talk about is important for me. I think it's something that we should really make sure that families understand, but also that those who may eventually end up having families in our city understand. So for me, the educational point is that, what was the second point of the question? I think, Meredith, I can't remember.
I think it's just like, if parents are wanting to join your network, how can they help influence your priorities and what you guys are working for or working towards?
I can jump in. You want me to jump in? Okay. You've talked a lot. Yeah, so I think there's we have a dual pronged strategy of where Kit just outlined some of our priorities for the year that we kind of, think about and set at the board level. And then also every day we're hearing from parents in our Facebook group, on Twitter, people emailing us constantly things that are important to them. I had opened the emails, we were getting started to make sure everyone had the login information. I had 5 emails from parents and different issues that they want us to look into, right? And so when we're hearing the same issue across the district, in the Excelsior and in the Richmond and in Soma, in the Tenderloin, when we're hearing it, and some issues aren't the district wide, but let's say it's a really big issue for the west side of the city, this after school issue. It wasn't a citywide issue. There were actually pockets this summer where families were having trouble getting into aftercare, but it was a big enough issue that was impacting enough families that we did lift that up, and that was all driven by parents and families across, in the district, because it wasn't something that we had on our radar to focus on. But then once we were hearing more and more from families that they were really struggling with it and they couldn't access aftercare, and school day, my kid's school gets out at 1:50 most days, and from working a full day, aftercare is vital for working families. And so that was an issue. That's just an example of how we prioritize issues that we hear directly from families. So also like the change of start times was something that came up and kind of hit us all by surprise. Like, wait, what? They're changing the start times to 9:30 or down to 7:50, and and we were hearing that from parents, from families, educators, and site administrators alike, asking us to help lift up that issue. So that was a really interesting issue. That we had principals emailing us for help with that one. And so, yeah, so it's kind of both like, we're setting things based on, hey, what do we think as a board? Like, what are some areas that we want to see the district improve on? How can, like, the budget crisis right now, is there something that, can we learn more about that? And start to get more knowledgeable about that and have some influence there, if we get smart on it and understand it better. But also, what are parents saying, in our Facebook group and, and around the city. And we're listening to public comment too, right? And not just the families who we're hearing from in our Facebook forum, but from other places. And there's other groups also that we're not directly connected with. There's the CPAC, the Chinese Parent Advisory Council, that we've been connecting more with recently to understand their concerns and to help, try to figure out where there's alignment and where we can help lift up some of their concerns. So there's a lot of different ways. I don't know if I answered the question.
But let me make a plug. Don't forget to join as a network member. That we definitely especially listen to our official members. So you can join online at sfparents.org. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that goes into Rob's next final question.
Yeah. The final question was, how can people get more involved? How can they plug in? How can they support all of the goals, priorities that you guys have outlined tonight?
Yeah, since I'm already unmuted still, like Kit just said, you can join at sfparents.org. You can become a member. It's free. You can join our Facebook forum. You can follow us on Twitter. We have a newsletter that we send out about once a week, and that you can also sign up on our website. And we put a lot of information there, again, that's being lifted up by families that we're hearing from board meetings. So for example, there was a special board meeting today at 4 p.m. that we attended, and our newsletter either tomorrow or Thursday will summarize some of what we learned there. So we put a lot of information in there that's helpful for families. So if they don't get a chance to attend the meeting because they're working or with their kids or living their life, and don't want to sit through these sometimes very boring meetings, we will boil it down for them. There's also opportunities to volunteer. In fact, we are powered by volunteers still. We would love for those big dollar funders to roll in any day now. Some folks think we have lots of them. We would, trust me, that would make all of our lives a lot easier. But until then, we're powered by volunteers. Everything from our graphic designs that you see to, our writing, our press releases, our op-eds, everything. It's all us. And we counted them recently. There's 150 people who have donated at least an hour or a few hours of their time over this past year. So if you'd like to volunteer, there's lots of opportunities there. And yes, now we can accept donations. That was part of our relaunch, is now we can accept donations. We're going to be a fiscally sponsored project of community initiatives as of tomorrow. And so we've got to get on that, make sure we change our bank stuff over. But yes, you'll be able to donate to us through community initiatives as of tomorrow, I think. And yeah, am I missing anything, guys? How else can you get involved? Attend our meetings, join us in person when we meet in person.
Join us at the school board meetings at 11 o'clock at night, because Rob, you asked who would want to be there. Well, actually, you're looking at some of the people that actually do that. But that is a really important way to be involved. I just want to say is that there are committees and board, and there's a lot happening in those things. And it is if you have the time, that can be a place to sort of build community with other parents and listen to the other voices and make your voice heard